Hey guys, TommyBryson here, and today we're going to talk about Capitalism and Freedom, a book written by Milton Friedman. Now, the first time I heard about this guy right here was back in college, and I had no idea who he actually was. But then after that, guys, I started reading finance books, I started learning about Warren Buffett, I started learning about investing, and every time I read a book, I always heard two names. I heard Adam Smith, here's this book right here, and I also heard about Milton Friedman. And by the way, guys, here is the man himself, Milton Friedman. By the way, he's no longer here. He died in like 2006. But the answer is, here he is. And this guy right here won a Nobel Prize for basically his entire ideas and consumption, okay? Now, this guy was an expert when it came to economics. And he's also an American, by the way. And this right here is Adam Smith and what he actually looks like back in those days. By the way, Adam Smith is like from like 200 years ago, maybe even further. But the point of this video, guys, we're actually going to go over what I found in the book by Milton Friedman called Capitalism and Freedom. Because if you care about money, finance, America, all these things are important, obviously, but the point is, in his book, he goes into detail on what true capitalism is and how a free market is actually supposed to work. And by the way, there are two types of reading, basically reading to learn things that you already really know, but then there's reading to find out things that you had no idea about. And this book, as I read it over and over and over again, I kept finding out new things I had no idea about. So I highly recommend you go ahead and check this book out. I read the Audible version of this book, so I'll put a link down below to Audible. And when you sign up, you get 2 free books. And I recommend, obviously, get Capitalism and Freedom by Milton Friedman, and also get The Wealth of Nations by Adam Smith. A great book that I'm about to start reading, and you'll see a book review on that pretty soon. But if you're new here, guys, make sure to also subscribe to the channel, hit the bell so you're notified. On top of that, also destroying the like button. Now, let's get started, guys, okay? The first thing I want to talk about is basically Capitalism and Freedom, the actual title of the book and what it actually means and what it symbolizes, okay? Now, when it comes to capitalism, the entirety of capitalism is basically a free market where people are able to do what they want to do to achieve what they want to achieve, but in that way, they also help the public good in a way. Now, let me explain here, guys, okay? Say, for example, you have Henry Ford. He made the automobile not because he wanted to help everyone in the world, but because basically he also wanted to become wealthy and achieve something for himself. And that's capitalism. But by doing that and creating the automobile, he then went ahead and helped a ton of people. Now, capitalism only works if it's a voluntary exchange by selling goods and buying goods. For example, if I forced you to buy my iPhone right now with a gun to your head, would you buy it? The answer is most likely you would. But you probably wouldn't come back and buy anything from me again, right? But if I told you, hey, I have an iPhone here, do you want to buy it? The answer is yes. And that's why Apple works so great, because they make a product that basically people want and improves their lives, and people are willing to actually pay for it freely, okay? And that's how capitalism actually works. It's the exchange of goods voluntarily. And on top of that, guys, you're going to see this all around today when you actually understand exactly how capitalism actually works and how self-interest drives someone to achieve something by giving somebody something and then getting what they want voluntarily. For example, you have Warren Buffett, an investor worth $80 billion. Well, by him amassing all this wealth, because that's what he wanted to, he's actually helped companies that help people and basically help the entire nation as a whole. Capitalism. On top of that, you have Jeff Bezos, a guy that, by the way, I didn't know this until I read the book about Jeff Bezos. And the idea is that Jeff Bezos, his dream was always to go to space. So he said, well, I need to build a company that is going to make me a lot of money to then go ahead and get what I want, which is basically to go to space. And by the way, Jeff Bezos built Amazon. Amazon has changed shopping for everyone out there and has helped a ton of people, but it's all about his self-interest as then in some way went ahead and helped the entire economy and also people as a whole for him trying to achieve his goal of, hey, I want to go into space. And by the way, he's also working on that. But that's what capitalism is. It's the exchange voluntarily by buying goods and selling goods, by having human beings chase exactly what they want to chase with no restrictions unless it's going to hurt somebody else. Now, the second part of the title is obviously freedom. What is freedom? Now, by freedom, I mean, hey, freedom to actually do what you actually want to do, not freedom to actually go out there and get like a free iPhone, something like that, okay? That's not the point here. But freedom, in a sense, in a capitalist country, a free nation, according to the book, freedom is basically allowing you to do what you want to do, buy what you want to buy, build what you want to build, as long as it does not hurt somebody else's freedom. For example, in a free society, there are always going to be restrictions, because basically, if there are no restrictions, then your freedom in some way is going to take somebody else's freedom away. Say, for example, I'm free to buy a home. This is my property, right? I own this home. But then you're also free to come in my home and steal everything I own. Well, that's not fair, because now you are basically stepping over my freedom. And that's why a free country also has limits. So you can be free, but you can't go ahead and hurt somebody or takes away somebody else's freedom. And that's how a free nation actually works. And that's what freedom basically means when it comes to this book right here. By the way, guys, okay, this book, highly important. Go read it. I highly recommend it after you're done with this review right here, okay? I just want to say that it's a great book, and I recommend the Audible version. That way you can be in the gym, walking around, doing whatever you want to do, but you're listening to this book because basically it has a lot of nuggets I never, ever thought about before. And on top of that, guys, just as a heads up, when you're reading this book, you're going to get a lot of controversial topics. For example, Social Security. Does that take away from freedom to actually go ahead and do your own thing? And the idea that freedom is allowing someone to go out there and make their own mistakes. For example, if you want to work your whole life and not save for your retirement, then that's up to you also. There are a lot of topics in here that basically are very controversial, and when you read it, you're going to understand exactly where Milton Friedman is actually coming from. And it changed my mind about a lot of topics out there, and that's why I like this book so much. But is it controversial? The answer is yes. It's very controversial, especially today, and in the whole, the whole thing that we're actually living today. Okay, so just keep that in mind. Now, number 2, the second nugget I found in this book is basically the proper role of government. And by the way, I just told you this book is controversial, and the idea is that government exists for one reason: to serve its citizens and to protect their rights and also to protect their property. And that includes the state government and also the federal government. They all exist just to take care of you and to make sure everything is fine and nobody is impeding on your right to actually be free. That is the proper role of the government according to Milton Friedman. So a good example of the role of the government is basically, say you're actually walking down the road and you have the freedom to do that, right? And you can actually buy whatever you want to buy, do whatever you want to do, as long as you're not hurting anybody else. And on top of that, you're not taking away from somebody else's freedom. That's the core idea when it comes to freedom. Now, say for example, you're walking down the road, but there's also a plant that's emitting a lot of smoke. Now that smoke is making it hard for you to actually breathe, and on top of that, it's dirtying your clothes and it's costing you money, basically. Now, you can't just go to the plant and say, hey, shut everything down, because in a sense, you're actually restricting their freedom to do whatever they're actually doing. So in this case, you would have the government step in and set regulations to then prevent the plant from doing things that are actually going to take away from your freedom in that way. But then you have to think about that basically, when the government does that, they have to step in, and you also have to pay taxes so they can actually regulate the entire thing. And that's the core foundation and a good example of how the government is supposed to step in when something cannot be just solved by the free market or through conversation or the people just talking to each other, okay? That's the idea right there. And also, there's another thing that I actually didn't read in the book, but I found in one of his articles and also in his videos. And by the way, there are videos on YouTube about Milton Friedman. I also recommend you actually watch those. Very important stuff. But the example is basically, although we have freedom as a nation as a whole, right? You can be free to do whatever you want. As a nation as a whole, we have to make decisions very promptly that not everyone would actually be okay with. And that's why freedom in a free country does have limitations. For example, the government is supposed to be in charge of the military, right? So for example, God forbid something's gonna happen and we need to go out there and actually enact war or whatever, right? The idea is we can't say, for example, well, 50% are saying yes, then 51% are saying no, so we might as well just send those 50% over to war, right? The idea is no. As a nation as a whole, some things are yes and no answers, and sometimes majority has to rule, and decisions have to be reached expediently and very fast in order to protect the nation. And that's why, although sometimes some things might be going against what freedom is to you, in some ways you have to enact them to then protect the freedom of the whole nation in a sense, okay? And that's the idea, at least when it comes to military and also war and all the other stuff. And by the way, remember, okay, when Milton Friedman wrote this book, it was back in the 1950s or 60s. So the idea is back then, communism, war, and the Great Depression, all that stuff was still fresh in the mind of Milton Friedman. So keep that in mind. Today it's kind of like, hey, that's not gonna happen, blah blah blah. But in a sense, we still need to actually fund military in case anything like that is going to happen. Okay, that's the point here. But guys, here is a bad example with good intentions of how the government can actually do something, think it's actually going to be good, but then turn around and actually be bad as a whole. Now, say for example, by the way, I had no idea about this, but you know how we have like public housing, especially in New York? The idea is that public housing was created in a way to help families that were in a way broken and needed help to basically hold off for a second, and then once they get back on their feet, then go ahead and do everything normally. But on top of that, it had a second reason, and the idea was that if these families are housed correctly and home correctly and have shelter, the idea is going to prevent violence. But in reality, they didn't realize that basically by doing that and putting all those families in the same place, in reality, it promoted a lot more violence. Because if you guys don't know this, and by the way, this is a sad fact that is true, and I'm also part of the statistic, if you grow up, for example, with a single mom or a single father, you're more likely to actually mess up in your life. Okay, that's the core idea, and I'm part of the statistic because basically I also grew up with my mom. But the point is that when you put all those people housed in one place in one area, they start conjoining together, and then they also create gangs and stuff like that. It's interesting how all this stuff works. So Milton Friedman suggests is basically, instead of giving people housing, why not in a way just give them a stimulus check, and that way they can grab that money and do whatever they actually want to do with it and take care of housing for themselves. But then the argument also becomes that, hey, if you give that money to the wrong people, they won't care about housing, and then they won't care about the kids they actually have, and then we have a bigger problem. But then we're also impeding on the freedom of saying like, hey, they're adults and they're supposed to do what they have to do for their self-interest. And that's where things get so complicated, and that's why those topics are so controversial, because in a way, you want to help someone, but they're also an adult, but you're saying that, hey, adults can't be trusted to make the decisions that you need to make. But it's so complicated. And I'm glad I read this book because basically it helps me understand the topics, but I'm not a professional on these topics, but it helps me understand the core foundations, and that's why I'm gonna keep reading more and more about all these things right here. But it's pretty cool. Okay, the point is that basically sometimes the government might do something with good intentions, but it might turn around and have the opposite effect that might actually cause some harm. And that's what it actually means. Okay, instead of actually putting people housed in one place and just lock them up in there, why not just give it a stimulus check and then basically have them go out there and find housing and all those things? Okay, which is actually not such a bad idea, but then you would have the cost of making sure those people are using the money for the correct reasons also. Okay, and in a way that's kind of impeding on freedom also. It's so complicated, but it's a good topic and a fun topic to actually learn about in this book right here. And the third thing is basically laissez-faire versus the visible hand. Now, as you guys know, and maybe you might not know this, but laissez-faire is basically the invisible hand that runs a free market economy. The idea is that basically, even if you want to do something or achieve something just because you want to achieve it in some way, there's going to be a second effect that is actually going to benefit other people if it is in a free market and it is in a fair situation. However, when the government does try to basically dip their fingers in it and basically make changes to alterate the entire thing and not let the market take care of it itself, well, again, it falls back to the same idea of, hey, it's going to cause other issues that we don't even know about. For example, when the government actually did the entire thing with the monopolies of the railroads, in reality, advertently, it created an issue where now they use it to control pricing. Okay, there's so many things in this book that I just had no idea or never even thought about thinking about these things that way. And in the end, guys, overall, the whole point of this video and the whole point of this book is just to basically talk about freedom and capitalism and what it actually looks like. And in reality, when you have a government going way too far and dipping their fingers way too in with good intentions, in reality, it can result in something that we actually don't want. For example, socialism or communism. And although these words are very dramatic and also very touchy, the idea is that when you look at the free economy and also what economists, people that actually study and give their whole lives to the topics, actually think about everything, the answer is that you need to look at it and understand exactly why things are going the way they are and where we're going to end up if we continue the way we're actually going. So it's a good way to understand exactly how the economy works, how free market works, and also how capitalism works by going ahead and reading this book. And by the way, once you're done with that book, make sure to go ahead and read this book, The Wealth of Nations by Adam Smith. And by the way, again, my link down below to Audible gives you guys 2 free books, so go ahead and get this book and the other book and then read them. And by the way, this is not a little book, okay? This is a very thick book with a lot of words that you probably don't understand, but I highly recommend whenever I read one of these books, the idea is I have Google open, that way I can search things up and find out exactly what they mean right then and there, because I'm not an economist. But if you want to learn these things and these topics, you have to be aware of what you're actually reading and understand this. So always have Google or a dictionary open to understand everything these brilliant minds are actually talking about. But guys, that's about it for this video. Comment down below, let me know if you're going to read it. And by the way, okay, this book in a lot of ways is very controversial today, but it also makes a lot of sense also. So read it with an open mind and understand that Milton Friedman basically gave over 50 to 60 years to economics, and also Adam Smith did the same. So the idea is that these guys know exactly what they're talking about. So just go ahead, read it, study it, and understand it, and see exactly what they mean and what you think about it with an open mind. I'll see you guys tomorrow. Thanks for watching this video. As always, like this video here, well, like this video. On top of it, if you're new here, subscribe and hit the bell so you're notified. And if you want to talk to me or text me, subscribe to my Patreon, link down below, or just send me a DM on Instagram, okay? And on top of that, if you want to see all the other books I read so far and the book reviews I've actually done, watch this playlist right here and click my face right now. I'll see you guys tomorrow. Thanks for watching, and as always, peace.